أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بفضل الله بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير خلق الله أجمعين محمد صلى على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في محكم كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الذين ينفقون في السراء والضراء والقاذمين الغيظ والعافين عن الناس والله يحب المحسنين. صدق الله العلي العظيم. That often we come across titles in our life that men and women give themselves certain titles, that they have a sense of entitlement and thus give themselves a title. We generally call a male a Mr. and a female a Miss or a Mrs. or a Ms., depending. And other people call themselves lords and barons and kings and princes or emirs, and they give, or sirs, and they give this title to themselves, or they are given this title for what they believe are certain reasons. But what value does this title have without authenticity? If you've heard sometimes people, they declare a small area of land, it could be their own home, 500 or 600 square meters, as a sovereign state, as a country. And this happens even within Australia. There's some people who've declared their own house as a country, a sovereign state. And they give it a name, and it has a certain passport, and they can do as they please in that area, apparently, as long as they don't upset the actual country that they are enveloped by. And so they still have to abide by those laws. However, they give themselves this authority. However, this authority has no real authenticity or validation. For example, we look at Australian money which is printed on a type of plastic, that the plastic that's within a $100 bill is probably the same mass of plastic that you find within a Kinder Surprise. However, they obviously do not have the same value regardless of mass or weight, because one has the authenticity of a sovereign nation and a government which says that this plastic banknote has the worth that is printed on it. And it says legal tender of so-and-so a nation, and therefore it has that title, and it has that validation from the nation, therefore it is legal tender, and it is valuable, and you can purchase things with it. The same with a person. What gives somebody the right to call themselves king of a certain land, or prince, or emir, or governor of this certain property or place? The majority of the royal families that we have in the world today have gained that status through conquering the ones who are weaker than them and taking that place. However, where does the real authenticity lie? Where does the real validation lie for these people that claim to be kings or claim to be leaders? They believe their authenticity comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's as simple as that. Because within the real world we notice that all people are equal. We have in the hadith that this is a hadith for people that think that are arrogant or think that they are better than others, that all people are the sons of Adam alayhi salam. All people are the sons of Nabi Adam, the first prophet. And Nabi Adam was made from turab, he was made from dirt. Therefore, ultimately we are all made from dirt. So there's nothing to be proud about and nothing that makes one better than the other, that we are all equal in this aspect. We all live, we all die, we all get sick, we all get hurt, we all have personalities. However, these people that claim to be kings believe that they have their authenticity from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For example, the European kings believe that they are direct descendants of Nabi Isa alayhi salam. That Nabi Isa had a brother, and through his brother they are the descendants of that brother. In actual fact, that the mother of the queen, back in the old days when she used to come out and see the people would bring their sick to get some barakah and to try and, some blessing from the mother of the queen and to try and get their sick cured. This is true. Because they believe that she is queen or she is the wife of the king and she holds or bears that status because she's actually a descendant of Nabi Isa. In the same way, we see that the kings of the Arab lands believe that this is qada wa qadar, that this is qadar Allah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said that this person has become king. The same argument they use, they tell you if the first Khalif wasn't meant to be the first Khalif, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wouldn't have made it so. But because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted him to be the first Khalif, therefore he was the first Khalif. That they give themselves titles that they are not entitled to. They claim to be in positions that they are not worthy of. I mean, even in general life, we see that people who have letters behind their name, they always want their letters mentioned. Or if, for example, they have a PhD, they want to be known as doctor. Or if they have a master's, they want to be known as master of whatever field that they are in. That they want this, and they say, we have a validation. This is our validation. It is a certificate that says, I'm a master of whatever, molecular physics, or I'm a molecular chemistry, I'm a master of whatever, or I have a PhD, I'm a doctor in, or the couple of letters that they put behind their names. The point is that they want this authenticity. However, what is the value of the authenticity if it lacks the proper and true validation? It's like, for example, sometimes somebody says something like, they'll say, I want to be known as biceps, for example, or I want to be known as triceps, or I want to be known as lats because this is what I am, I have such huge lats. And people laugh at this. Why? Because obviously if his lats were so big, he would be in a competition. Or if his quads were so big, he would be in such a competition or something to validate the size of these muscles. So therefore it is a joke. Sometimes someone that isn't very close to religion, as a bit of a mockery, sometimes people say about him, look at this guy's Mu'min al-Taq, for example. They give him a name of someone that's really pious, however he has nothing to do with piety. Or vice versa. Look at this guy, he's a Zu'uri, for example, someone that's a troublemaker or a problematic person, and we say it as a joke, but actually they are somebody that is pious. However, sometimes people attempt to take this value and place it upon themselves. We see very early in Islamic history that when the first two Khalifs usurped the position of Amir al-Mu'mineen, of Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, when they usurped his position, not only did they take his God-given right, not only did they take the status that he was meant to have, not only did they take the status that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created him for, but they even took his name. Do you know how important a name is to a person? The name is everything. We have, in the dogma of salesmanship, you will hear that the people that become salesmen are taught to always call people by their first name. Why? Because calling someone by their first name is like honey to their ears, or like music to their ears. That is the sweetest thing that they can hear. When they hear their name, they listen, they give you all their attention. Why? Their name is what they have been called from when they were young. That this whole time they've been called whatever their name is, Habib or whatever, and he gets called the name, and so he remembers, Habib. Every time he's Habib, he gives his full attention. Somebody's called me by my name. So they took his name and his title. One said, I will be As-Siddiq al-Akbar, and the other said, I will be Al-Faruq al-A'zam. And these two titles are something that were given to other than them. Not only that, they were given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not only that, they cannot validate these titles. The one who calls himself As-Siddiq al-Akbar and then turns around, and what does he do? He calls Amir al-Mu'mineen a liar. He asks Fatima al-Zahra salawatullah alayha to bring witnesses to her claim. The daughter of the Holy Prophet is going to lie in the Islamic court about a certain claim. Can we call this person As-Siddiq al-Akbar? He attributes false hadith to the Holy Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, saying that us, nahnu ma'ashir al-anbiya, la nuwarrith, that us, the prophets or the people of prophethood, do not give irth, we do not give inheritance. So there is no inheritance. We see that Rasulullah says about Amir al-Mu'mineen, Amir al-Mu'mineen says about himself, he says, Ana Abdullah, wa akhu Rasulullah, wa ana as-Siddiq al-Akbar, la yaquluha ba'di illa kadhibun muftir, wa laqad sallaytu ma'a Rasulullah qabla an-nas li 7 سنين, wa ana awwal man salla ma'a. This is from many sources. Of the source that this hadith is from is Fada'il al-Sahaba li Ahmad ibn Hanbal in the first volume. So this is obviously from the source of the other school. That Amir al-Mu'mineen says that I am the slave of Allah. First and foremost, that I am Abdullah. to the prophets and the anbiya and the awliya, that this is the highest level that they reach, is being a abd of Allah. That they are a servant of Allah. وَأَشْهَدُ أَنَّ مُحَمَّدًا عَبْدُهُ وَرَسُولُهُ. We are told to say in our prayers, that the status of abd, this is enough fakhr, this is enough pride to be known or to be related or associated with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as His servant. That I am the servant of Allah. This is the highest accolade that I can achieve. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala becomes everything. That's my backing. That's my validation. That's my authenticity. This is who I have on my team. I am Abdullah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is my authenticity and my validation. And then He says that I am the brother of Rasulullah. And He says I am as-Siddiq al-Akbar. I am the one who is said the most truthful. The greatest of the truthful is I. And whoever says this about themselves other than me, then he is a liar, and he is someone that is trying to take this position. That is someone that is forging this status. That he is a liar and a forger, a claimant or a false claimant. And then he says that I prayed with the Holy Prophet for 7 years before anybody accepted Islam. That I was the first to pray with Rasulullah, and this is why I have this status. Whoever says this other than me is a liar. So they turn around and say, well, the first Khalif took this status, or learnt this, said that he became a Siddiq al-Akbar because when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asra bi'abdihi laylan min al-Masjid al-Haram ila al-Masjid al-Aqsa, that in the story of Isra wal Mi'raj, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ascended with the Holy Prophet to the heavens, from Masjid al-Haram ila al-Masjid al-Aqsa and then unto the heavens on al-Buraq. He says that when he came back, the unbelievers, the pagans said, we don't believe you. Why don't you believe me? He says, because they say to him, because it takes you from Mecca to Medina 12 days, and you expect us to believe that in one night you went from Mecca to Masjid al-Aqsa and then to the heavens in one night and then came back. And so they say the first Khalif said to them, I believe, so they called him as-Siddiq al-Akbar. And then the second one, in the second one, he says, Rasulullah says about Amir al-Mu'mineen, أنت أول من آمن بي وأول من يصافحني يوم القيامة. That you are the first one that believed me, and you are the first one that will greet me and shake hands with me on the day of judgment. وأنت الصديق الأكبر وأنت الفاروق الذي يفرق بين الحق والباطل. That you are the distinction, Al-Faruq Al-A'zam, you are the distinction between truth and falsehood. وأنت يعصوب المؤمنين والمال يعصوب الظالمين أو الكافرين وأنت أخي ووزيري وخير من أترك بعدي تقضي ديني وتنجز موعدي. So he says to him, O Ali, that you are the first who believed in me, and you are the first who will greet me on the day of judgment. And you are the most truthful, the great truthful one, and you are the great distinction, Al-Faruq Al-A'zam, between truth and falsehood. Furthermore, you are the one who holds the religion together in the same way wealth holds the oppressors together. The Zalimin or the Kafirin are held together by money, that's it. Whoever pays the most comes towards them. But you, Amir al-Mu'mineen, you are the glue of the faith. You are the one that allows the whole faith to stick together. And he says to him that you are my brother and you are my advisor and you are the best of my will that I leave after me. So Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam gives him the validation of these titles. Where is the validation of the other two? And these are from those books. That they don't have that validation. They lack that validation, and yet they wish that they could have that title and that position of Al-Faruq Al-A'zam or As-Siddiq Al-Akbar. That people are known by their titles for certain reasons. And we said the greatest of statuses and positions that we can have is Abd min Abidullah. That the best status or the best accolade is to be a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Imam al-Sajjad salawatullahi alayhi, whom we are commemorating his martyrdom tonight, was known as Zayn al-Abidin. That Abd, what is the forte of Abd? What does Abd do? Ya'bud, he worships. And Imam Zayn al-Abidin is the ornament of the believers. That look at all the worshippers and then look at what is the ornament of the believers, and this is Imam al-Sajjad salawatullahi alayhi. That Imam al-Sajjad gained this title from what? From validation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That the Holy Prophet said that these are my Khalifs after me, these 12s from Banu Hashim. These are their names and these are their titles. This one will be called Al-Sajjad, and you will see him in the future why his name will be Al-Sajjad. Why? Whenever he remembered a ni'mah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a bounty, he would stop and he would do sujood. Wherever he was, he would stop and he would go down and do sujood. For every bounty he remembers, he would do sujood. In fact, he done sujood so much that they said his forehead and his palms and his knees and his toes were calloused. They were so calloused that they had to cut them off in his lifetime 7 times. And they said the parts that they cut off, they kept the calloused parts and they were buried with him. That Imam al-Sajjad used to plant palm trees. And he used to pray 2 rak'at next to every palm tree. They say he had 500 palm trees and would pray 1,000 rak'at every night. They say that Imam al-Sajjad, one of his servants, or one of the people that used to be with, that used to serve him in the house, they asked her about him. She said, I never bought him a meal during daylight, and nor did I ever put out a place for him to sleep during the night. That this is Imam al-Sajjad, his whole life was fasting, remembrance of Allah, and staying awake during the night, praying and remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That this holy Imam, what makes him so great is not just the worship, but the greatest part about Imam al-Sajjad, Imam Zayn al-Abidin salawatullahi alayh, is his akhlaq. Like all of the Imams, there's so much I can tell you about their miracles. And the miracles, they're nice stories. And inshallah we'll bring some in. However, this wasn't the core of Islam. The core of Islam was the akhlaq. وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala validates and testifies in the Holy Quran to the greatness of his akhlaq. Imam al-Sajjad salawatullahi alayhi, he had such great akhlaq, the way that he used to deal and speak and be with the people. That, generally, sometimes you meet someone and they have bad akhlaq or they're a bit dry. And the older you get, the less somehow it feels like it's the less patience you have among people. So sometimes some of the elderly aren't very patient. So we say, just like the youth, they're sometimes aren't very patient. And so we say, oh, it's all right, he's a youth. Oh, it's all right, he's old. Or for example, if somebody has been through a traumatic situation, or someone's doing it tough, someone's battling it out really hard, that we say, don't worry about this guy, take it easy with him because he's doing it tough, he's battling it out really hard, or he's been through a traumatic experience. So he's suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. And so they say that, take it easy with him, his emotions aren't so well. Imagine Imam al-Sajjad, what he went through at the beginning and the end of his life. That at the beginning of his life, when he was just a youth, in his 20s, he had to see his whole family martyred. And the ones that were martyred were off to paradise, but Imam al-Sajjad had to be taken with the women folk prisoner and the children, and taken and marched from Karbala to Damascus. And they say that they marched not through the main cities, because they feared there would be an uprising through the main cities if there was a large number of Shia. So they would take them like from the Kufa, and then they would take some back roads, and then go to the next main city, and then back roads. The distance as the bird flies is about 880 kilometers from Karbala to Damascus. 884 kilometers, that's almost the distance between Sydney and Melbourne, or it's about the distance between Sydney and Melbourne. That Imam al-Sajjad was shackled in manacles and placed on a camel without any saddle. If you walk for a long period of time, sometimes your legs begin to chafe from the pants that you're wearing or whatever, if you walk for an hour. That imagine he was on a camel for that long, that they say when he reached Damascus, his legs were bleeding from the hardship that he went through. And after seeing all of this, then he's released into the Medina, and they see that he was the epitome of akhlaq and good manners. In fact, this verse is mentioned about the Ahlul Bayt al-Qadimin al-Ghayth wal-'afin 'an al-nas wallahu yuhibbul muhsinin, the ones that withhold their anger and the ones that pardon the people, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves the doers of good. Imam al-Sajjad salawatullahi alayhi, his akhlaq, he used to talk to his servants like he talks to his sons. He used to call them Ya Bunay. This beautiful term is like saying my son, but it's something that's much more eloquent and elegant in the Arabic language. That this is the way he used to speak to his sons, and this is the way that he used to speak to his servants. He says to his son in his wasiyah, he says, Ya Bunay if'al al-khayr. إلى كل من طلبه منك فإن كان من أهله فقد أصبت موضعه وإن لم يكن من أهله كنت أنت من أهله وإن شتمك رجل عن يمينك ثم تحول إلى يسارك واعتذر إليك فاقبل عذره. That he says to him, O son, that do good to the deserving and to the non-deserving. For the deserving one deserves the good, and the non-deserving, then you are worthy of giving that good. Look at the akhlaq. In fact, and this is not just words, he shows it in practice. Do you know when Hussein ibn Numayr, who was an enemy, and he was somebody who was fighting against Imam al-Hussein in Karbala, and afterwards he was placed in command over the army that would go to the Medina, followed by Muslim ibn Aqaba in the occasion or the battle of Al-Harra. This is when they went into the Medina and they ransacked all the houses and they used the grave of Rasulullah, the mosque of Rasulullah, as a stable for their horses, and they pillaged the whole town. The only women that were safe were the ones with Imam Zayn al-Abidin. So who comes to Imam Zayn al-Abidin? Of all people on planet Earth, Marwan ibn al-Hakam. He says to him, I'm in trouble. That I've got issues now with Yazid ibn Muawiyah, and my women folk are in trouble. Would you look after them for me? Imagine this. That Marwan ibn al-Hakam, I'll just tell you, other than the fact that Rasulullah exiled him from the Arabian Peninsula and said, you're never allowed to come back, and his son, and his father, Al-Hakam. But Marwan ibn al-Hakam was with the governor of Medina. When Yazid sent the letter and he said, bring me the bay'ah of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, or his head, either way. So when Imam al-Hussein went to see the governor of Medina, Marwan ibn al-Hakam was there, he was his advisor. He said to him, don't even give him the option, take his head now. Because if you let him leave, you won't have the chance to take his head. This is who Marwan ibn al-Hakam is. That in fact, if you look throughout history, he's got a play in every move. In every killing of the Imams, he's got a play, and then he comes to Imam Zayn al-Abidin and says that I have an issue now. My women folk are going to be in trouble. Your women folk are secured. They won't dare come near these women folk in the same way that they dared to go in the women folk of the people of Medina, or attack the women folk of the people of Medina. So Imam Zayn al-Abidin accepts and takes his women folk. And Imam Zayn al-Abidin gives him safety. This cursed wretch of a person, and look how the Imam treats him. And then the women folk in the history books are narrated to have said that our treatment in the house of Imam Zayn al-Abidin was better than the treatment of our parents in our parents' house. That this is the treatment we got there, and he kept them safe and secure. And then he says to him, if someone swears to you on your right and then walks onto your left and apologizes, then accept his apology. Imam Zayn al-Abidin was somebody politically at the time who had no political power, but he had the validation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So his political power at the time was zero. So people would consistently swear at him for no reason. Say, oh, you so-and-so, and they would swear. Even relatives of his say, we want money. And if he says, oh, I haven't got, they start swearing. So some of the companions said, we're going to attack them. The Imam said, no. And he comes out to one of them. One of them, he swears at him and goes home. So the Imam says, follow me and I will show you how to respond to someone like this. He goes to his house, he stands outside. They tell him Ali ibn al-Hussein is outside. Salawatullah alayhi. So his cousin comes out and says, what do you want? He comes out ready to start a fight. So the Imam says to him, of what you have said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has covered a lot of our misdeeds. This is how the Imam speaks. Look at the humility of the Imam. The Imam is ma'soom. He says, however, if what you have said is true, then may Allah forgive me. And if what you have said is false, then may Allah forgive you. And then he changes. His cousin changes. And he looks at him and he says, I want money. So the Imam says, he's 1,000 dinars. So then he says, truly you're the son, anta min abna al-rusul. You are the son of the prophets. That he accepts and he agrees that the Imam has the status. He got his money, but the akhlaq, this is what completely changed him. So he showed his companions that this is how you deal with someone who is like this. This is the way you deal with these people. That Imam al-Sajjad was somebody who would pray so much, and even though he was worthy of this title, that he was Zainul Abidin, he was Sayyid al-Sajidin, he was the grandson of the Holy Prophet, someone who is worthy of these statuses, and yet what does he say when they see him in Baytullah al-Haram crying and weeping? And he continually used to say, Ubayduka bi fana'ik, Ya Allah, that your servant, your small servant is at your door, asking. And so they used to say to him, why are you crying? And he would cry the whole night. You are the grandson of Rasulullah. Paradise is yours. And then he says, the companion says to him, what about you? You're the grandson of Rasulullah. Who am I? He says, فَلَا أَنْسَابَ بَيْنَهُمْ يَوْمَئِذٍ. He says that on this day, the day of judgment, there will be no relations. That no one will walk up and say, I'm the grandson of Rasulullah, give me a golden ticket into paradise. This is what Imam al-Zayn al-Abidin tells him. The Holy Imam tells him that on this day, these relations mean nothing. That it will be a man and his deeds, and this is why I do these deeds. That the Imam used to love to go out in the middle of the night and give to people. What he would do, he would actually get the food and put it on his back. That they say that after his martyrdom, when they were washing his body, they noticed the marks on his back were calloused from the weight that he used to carry on his back. And go from house to house and give in the middle of the night with his face covered. The poor never knew, just like his father did, and his grandfather and his great-grandfather. They all did this was the same method of operation for them. That in the middle of the night they would go out and they would give to the poor, and they would give to the poor. And the poor never knew until they died. They began to cry and realize that the one that was given us is the one that has died. They would be the ones that would follow the burial procession for the Imams, because they knew that this had gone away from them. So the Imam would go out all night and he would give and he would give and he would give of everything he had. In fact, there's a tradition that says he used to go to the Hajj, and there's so many stories about the beauty of his akhlaq and the things that he initiated that we haven't even thought of until the last 50 years. One, for example, he used to go to the Hajj on a certain camel. 20 times or 25 times this camel took him to the Hajj. Not once did he ever hit this camel or beat this camel. And it's an animal. This is how we would treat an animal. And then when, after 20 years, it was too old, he said to his companions, when it dies, you bury it. Because the animals, they used to throw it to the wild animals. When an animal dies, they throw it to the wild animals, and he says, I don't want the wild animals to eat this animal. Don't harm this animal, look after this animal, and when it dies, bury it. That he even gave the animal rights. When he used to travel, he would travel with people and he would find people that don't know who he is. And he would say that the only way I will come with you is if that I can serve you to the Hajj. So he would go with them and he would serve them, he would bring them water, and they would just treat him normally. So one day as they are going, a person comes up and says, woe unto you, do you know who this is that is serving you? And they say, no. They say, this is Ali ibn al-Hussein. So they say, Assalamu alaikum. So they say, Astaghfirullah. They come up to him and say, why didn't you tell us, you Ali ibn al-Hussein? What if we did something wrong? What if we swore at you? What if we pushed you? He says, the last time I traveled with people who knew who I was, that I was the grandson of Rasulullah, they gave me as if I was Rasulullah, and I am not worthy of this status of Rasulullah. And so therefore, whenever I travel, I tell people that I make sure I go with people that do not know or do not understand who I am. That of the ad'iyah of Imam Zayn al-Abidin, they are so great, of the dua that he says, they're unbelievable. If you research them and look them and see their meanings are very heavy. He says to Allah, he says, Subhanaka tasma'a anfas al-haytan fi qu'ur al-bihar. That you hear the breathing of the whales in the depth of the ocean. That up until recently, they didn't even know whales make the sound that they make. Or up until recently, they didn't even know whales breathe the way that they breathe, or what they are. But he tries to give us an understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by speaking about the creation. But think about it, these things. Furthermore, he says, Subhanaka ta'alam wazn al-shams wal-qamar. That up until recently, I don't think, up until the last 100 years, scientifically, they didn't think of the moon and the sun as celestial bodies, as actual planets that have mass. The sun being a great burning ball of fire. They would have thought of it in historically as just something that gave out light. What was it? A lamp, a candle, a lantern, what they would call it. But he speaks about the mass of the planets. Subhanaka ta'alam wazn al-dhulumati wan-nur. That you know the weight of light and darkness. This is truly amazing that you think 1400 years ago that it was less than 100 years that they understood that light doesn't only come in the form of rays, but it comes in the form of photons. And photons, small molecules, small subatomic structures that actually have a mass and a weight. SubhanAllah, that even and darkness, obviously the study of dark matter is huge. It's massive. It's in terms of astronomical studies, it's something that's very new. Again, we're talking last 100 years, and something that's very deep, without going into the details of what it's about. But this is Imam Zain al-Abidin in a small dua, in a couple of sentences, shows some mysteries into science. However, this has nothing to do with science, but he's trying to show you the azam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the greatness of Allah. Subhanaka ajaban man arafak, kayfa la yakhafuk. That glory be to thee, whoever knows you, how do they not fear you? This was the akhlaq of the Imam, that he would even call to his servants, and he would say to his servant, he would call out to them and say, Ya bunay, O son. And he would call, and sometimes they wouldn't listen, so he would come up and say, why didn't you listen to me? And so his companion, his servant would say that I feel I am safe from your wrath. And so the Imam would say, Alhamdulillah alladhi ja'ala mamluki ya'minani. That praise be to Allah, that the one that I own feels safety from me. That imagine, and this is, think about it as a slave or servant. In those days, under that concept, you have ownership over that being. But the Imam, look at the way that he would treat this being that apparently he would have had ownership over. But he treats him in that manner, that yes, you feel that you're safety from me, praise be to Allah. As opposed to, think about it sometimes how we treat, for example, our wives or our children, and give them the wrathful stare or a wrathful shout or a scream or a beating or whatever, to put them in their place. For the children specifically, to put them in their place. And this is something that's beyond what the Imams used to do. This is something that's beyond Islam. It's out of the realm of Islam. This is the way that this Imam used to treat people, and this is the akhlaq that he begins to teach us. The Imam, during his prayer and his ibad, when he would pray, he would be aloof from the world. That he would see nothing around him that was of this world. That in fact, to the extent that one day when he was praying, the robe that he was wearing as he's praying fell off him, and he continued to pray. So one of his companions came up to him after he finished praying, and he said to him that your robe fell off and you didn't even fix it, or you didn't touch it. And so the Imam says to him, Wayhak, atadri bayna yaday man kunt? He says, do you know between whose hands I was, who I was standing before? This is what it means. Do you know who I was standing before? لا يقبل من صلاته إلا ما أقبل عليه منها بقلبه. So our prayers, he says, basically, the only thing that will be accepted from your prayer is what you bring from your heart. That if you bring your heart towards the prayer, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts that part of it. The part that your heart is not within it is the part that's not accepted. So the companion says, if this is the case, then we're all doomed. And the Imam says, this is why Allah made the nawafil. That you pray the nawafil so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can accept the shortcomings of the main part of prayer. But this is the way Imam Zain al-Abidin used to be. This is the way Imam al-Sajjad would be through his akhlaq and his worship. This is more than enough than to hear about the miracles of the Imam. That the miracles are really auxiliary, they're secondary. They're not the primary thing. The primary thing is to learn from the akhlaq and the mannerisms of this Imam, who was tortured throughout his life. Towards the end of his life was shackled and taken away again. Why? He had no political power, but the evil people won't let you be. This is a myth. A myth that sometimes we believe that the bad people will just let you be. That the ones who hate Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the ones who love to sin and love to commit bad, will let you be. This is not going to happen. With Imam al-Sajjad, alayhi salam, this was the same thing. That when the Marwani Khalifs were in power, I believe it was Al-Walid, the Khalif Al-Walid, who was the one that poisoned Imam al-Sajjad from his jealousy, but he was pushed by Husham ibn al-Hakam. Husham ibn al-Hakam was also somebody that later would take the position of Khalif, and he was somebody that used to hate the Imam. Hate him with a passion. Particularly for one of the reasons, and this is a similar story we see with all of the Imams, that when he went to the Hajj, he was next to Al-Hajar al-Aswad, or Al-Hajar al-As'ad. And Husham tried to make it into Hajar al-Aswad, and he couldn't make it in. Because the people around, and anyone that's been to Hajj will see, it's very difficult. That it's like the world's largest scrum of people trying to get into Hajar al-Aswad, and you're fighting to get through. So when Imam al-Sajjad came next to the Hajar al-Aswad, the people moved. They saw the light on his face. They saw he has the look of prophethood. That it looked as if the Hajar wanted to touch him. So the people with Husham, all the bigwigs, they said that you tried and you're the Amir or you're the cousin of the Amir. And this guy just walks in and it's as if the Hajar wants to touch him. Who is he? He says, I don't know. Some guy, random guy. And then one of his companions was the poet Al-Farazdak. And he writes a beautiful poem about Imam al-Sajjad. And he begins to say this poem in front of Husham ibn al-Hakam. That if you don't know who this person is, then I'll tell you who knows. The Sha'a'ir of Allah know who this person is. He says Makkah and Mina know who this person is. As-Safa wal Marwa know who this person is. The water of Zamzam know who this person is. That all of these things that Allah made holy know who this person is. This is the son of these people. This is the reason for, he is the reason for the creation of the world, and this is why the rock comes to him, not that he goes toward the rock. Allah salli ala Muhammad. So after seeing this, he got so jealous of the Imam that he ordered the Imam to be shackled and taken away. When they took him away during his imprisonment, he was poisoned. And through this poisoning, this is how our holy Imam got to the stage where got to the stage of his demise, and where he got to the stage where he had to meet his Maker and leave this world. We're actually very low on time, and I wanted to mention a few of the miracles of the Imam. One of them was a certain lady, and this is written in Hada'iq al-Shi'a, and it is remembered in a book, Al-Amali by Shaykh Abbas al-Qummi, Radwanullahi ta'ala alayh. And he says that a lady saw Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, and she said to him, Sayyidi Mawlai, we know you're the Imam, but how can we prove, how do we know who the next Imam is, and the Imam after this, and the Imam after that, this is something that is difficult for us. And so the Imam sat next to the mosque, and he said to her, go and pick up a rock. He pointed at a rock. So she picked up a stone. He took the stone and he placed his seal of his ring into the stone, and it went into the stone. Imagine a hard rock, and he stamped his seal into it. And he says to her, take this rock. And when you see my son become the Imam, same thing, and the next Imam and the next Imam. So after the martyrdom of Amir al-Mu'mineen, she goes to Imam al-Hasan, and the same thing, Imam al-Hasan stamps his seal onto the rock. So she understands he's the Imam. And Imam al-Hussein, he stamps his seal onto the rock. When she gets to the time of Imam al-Sajjad, they say that she was 113 years old. She was an old woman. And she sees Imam al-Sajjad, he's in prostration, obviously. Praying in prostration. So she stands, he hasn't finished, so she goes to leave. And while he's in prostration, he points with his finger. They say that this lady turns from an old woman into a young woman. She becomes back to her youth. And then when he finishes praying, he takes the rock, he stamps the rock for her and gives it back to her. She says that after this, I then saw his son and got the same, and his son's son, and I got the same. And she said, this rock, I would take it with me everywhere. That in any place of darkness, it would illuminate the darkness of that place and make it bright. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Sallallahu ala. This is one of the many miracles of Imam Zayn al-Abidin sallallahu alayhi. But again, these miracles are essential and they're important to look at and believe in. But the true value of the Imam isn't from the miracles. The value of the Imam is the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives him this validation. The value of the Imam is in his akhlaq. The value of the Imam is in his ibadah. And this is what makes the Imam who the Imam is. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us onto the righteous path and to guide us, to help us against our lower selves. In the same way He helps the righteous of His servants. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us of the followers of Imam Zayn al-Abidin and of the people who stand with him on the Day of Judgment. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. رحم الله من قرأ سورة المباركة الفاتحة وأهدى ثوابها إلى أرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات وسوق الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد.